Good evening, poultry keepers. We're glad you're here. Tonight, we're going to do a show on best feeding and tips and practices. We've got a list of 10 most common problems that you folks probably encounter, but always know that you are more than welcome to chip in and ask questions during the show. So give us just a few seconds and we'll get this show started. And we are all here. I wasn't so sure that Jeff was going to make it tonight because he's up in some Canada. How cold was it up there, Jeff?
Canada.
Hey, we had a great day. It was 42 degrees on the truck thermometer on my way back. So we are above freezing, it has not been the last 5 days in Canada. So
I just started to say that's about a heat wave up there now.
Yeah.
That's what it is here.
No, we hit almost 80 here.
We were having nights at 6 degrees or closer even to zero. And then we were having daytime highs around 18, 20 degrees. So it's all right. I'm surviving.
Good deal.
Good time.
Good deal. Well, let's kick this puppy off. Feeding poultry may seem simple, but gosh, so many poultry keepers face challenges, I know I did, that can lead to feed waste, inefficiencies, and even health issues. So here's our list of the top 10 feeding problems, and we'll have tips to help you overcome them. Kerry, what do you think the number one list is, or the number one question on the list is here?
How much feeder space do I need?
Nope. That wasn't one of them.
Nobody ever asked that.
The number one problem that people are apt to encounter is excessive feed waste or feed spillage.
Most definitely.
Poultry will often scratch out, spill, or flick feed from open feeders. I see that happen a lot when the feed trough isn't quite deep enough or is designed poorly. I got some tube feeders one time, and the tray sides, instead of being straight up and down, were angled out. Man, they could stand there and flick corn all over the place with that. It wasn't any problem at all. So, Jeff, what do you think would be some good solutions to that? How can they prevent that billing or flicking out of feed?
Like they haven't already heard me say this a million times, but limit how much you feed so they see the bottom of the feeder every day. They won't waste a lick. And 2, get your feeder height right, and they can't get it out.
I see that problem a lot. Feeders are hung too low or they're sitting on the ground, and that is just really leads to a lot of waste. It really does.
I mean, that was a big thing for me before I knew better was that. And Rip, I think it was you that told me that my feeder was way too low because I was sending you pictures back and forth. And when you told me how high to raise it, I was like, well, how are they going to get to it? But then I got to thinking, as a kid, when we're sitting at the table, Mom always says, sit up straight. So make your chickens sit up straight too.
There you go. And folks, if you haven't heard us say this 1,000 times, you want the height of the feeder lip just about level or maybe just a tad higher than their back. And that will cut out a lot of feed waste. Don't forget, every time those birds are wasting feed, it's costing you money. Besides making a mess and causing you a problem.
I'm for a minute, I'm going to defend people's not knowing, okay, in that when you turn chickens loose, okay, they see them eating things or looking for things on the ground.
Yep.
So your initial thought process is that's where they want to eat.
Yeah.
And, but, when once you've tuned into this show for 2 years and you've heard it enough, right? It's so, what they're looking for on the ground ain't what they're looking for in the feeder. And it's just different.
Yeah. And you said tuned in and listened for 2 years. Sometimes I think it's closer to 2 months before we get on to all this stuff over and over and over. But no, you're right.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Oh man, doesn't it ever? The number 2 issues that people have is rodent and wild bird infestation.
So before you go there, Sue had a question.
Oh.
Right. And
I love that question.
Okay, Sue, PVC pipes, if properly cut, are awesome feeders. And here's the secret. Okay. Everybody wants to make 2 feeders and they cut them in half, and that is wrong. You cut 1/3 of the pipe off, and that way it still has a slight curve inward, and that keeps the bird from wasting feed. Okay?
Lots.
And PVC pipe feeders are awesome, but you can only cut 1/3 off. Okay. If you cut it in half, you will not be happy.
Jeff, I made that big mistake. The first one of those PVC pipe feeders I made, I'm saving money. I'm going to make 2 feeders out of one.
Yeah.
Didn't take me but just a few minutes before I realized I had screwed up by doing that.
Yeah. So the feeder that Jeff turned me on to for feeding a large grow out, he's like, I'll get you a piece of 6-inch PVC and, build the hopper and do all that. I was like, oh, hey, I got this. And, where I live, 6-inch PVC is not common. And I had to drive to the other side of town, about 45 minutes.
It's not cheap either anymore.
$65 for a 10-foot stick. I was like, ouch. So, Jeff's like, you're going to make this thing 5 feet wide, do this. I was like, oh, cool, man. I made 4 of them. Yes. And the first one I cut in half, and I looked at it, and I just started shaking my head. And I was like, when you question what Jeff says to do, it hasn't really worked out in the past. Why did you do this? So needless to say, I only have one of those feeders, and 2 halves of 6-inch PVC pipe. But hey, the one that I made, that is a solid feeder for 50 birds.
Yeah. And what I like about them, if you hang them right, the birds can eat from both sides, and that helps with the squabbling and the feed hogging.
Mm-hmm.
Sue had another question here. Let's see.
I just put it up, but you took it down.
Sorry.
All right. I got it.
All right. Get it.
Rick, we got a problem. Jeff has finally figured out how to use StreamYard, and we can't stop him now.
I only learned one new trick. Okay.
Okay.
But you do it so well. She wants to know, what about the stand-up or the vertical PVC pipe feeders? So those are good, but there's one fatal flaw in those things. Our big single comb males cannot eat out of them without damaging their comb, if they can even get their head in there. So that's something to bear in mind.
I was going to say,
the ones I've seen, only one bird can eat at a time. So I can't restrict feed properly in, the vertical one.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say, Jennifer raises dinosaurs or Orpingtons, whatever, and she uses 4-inch PVC in her breeding pens that she has, where she'll have 2, maybe 3 birds in there. And the 4-inch PVC works okay for large fowl single comb, but like y'all said, only one bird can eat at a time. But you know, if you've only got a couple of birds, I think it would be okay as long as if you're free choice feeding. Now, if you're limiting,
Well,
that rooster is going to eat a buffet, and them 2 hens aren't going to get a whole lot.
I made some 5-foot long horizontal feeders, and then I've also cut them up and made some 2-foot long horizontal feeders where I've got just a pair or trio in a pen.
Mm-hmm.
But I much prefer the horizontal over the vertical format. Getting back to our question here, rodents and wild bird infestations. I can't tell y'all how many times I have looked at photos on the internet and I see pellets all over the ground or scratch feeds all over the ground right around the feeder, and it never gets eaten and it never gets cleaned up, and that's just like hanging out the diner is open signs out there for rodents and wild birds.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously we don't want either one of those around there for biosecurity purposes. And you know, they got some diseases that are not good for chickens, and they're not good for people either.
Yep.
Well, you were just talking about wasted feed, you know, in the first, and
Yeah.
so wasted feed because of overfeeding or improper feeder height, right? You know, if you've got layers long enough, if you don't manage them correctly, you will have rats and mice.
Yep.
Now, if you have a hanging suspended feeder that's pretty well empty at the end of the day because your chickens ate it all, well, there's not a good reason to come visit. Now, if you want to leave that feeder full and only feed once a week, then you will have rats and mice.
Yep.
Just ain't.
And it's funny when I see that the rat and mice problems, those are some of the same people that send in photos of their bird and want to know what's the matter with their feathers. And it's where rats and mice have chewed on them or actually eaten the feathers right off their backs, and they'll ruin the bird's tail.
Oh yeah, I was going to say they'll ruin the tail.
Yeah.
Bad. Because I have seen that.
Another problem that we run into is moldy or spoiled feed. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'll admit sometimes when I bought feed from the store, which was a long time ago now, fortunately, the feed was obviously old because when I opened it up, it was musty, and you could just see the mold spores floating through the air when I opened it up. And you could tell it was spoiled. But if you're not storing your feed properly, then you can run into those same issues as well, and you can run into a problem with mycotoxin if you get enough mold buildup in your feed.
Yep.
And Jeff can speak to that if he wants to, but that mycotoxin scares me to death because, man, it's hit before you even realize it sometimes.
Yep. Yep. And it builds up gradually, right? So depending on the level of the mycotoxin, you know, you could be feeding a low level for a month or 2 or even 3. And then all of a sudden, you know, somebody messages me and my fertility rate is horrible, or you know, my birds, you know, the feathers don't look right, or I mean, it'll manifest in so many different ways. And ultimately, a mycotoxin is stealing the bird's ability to digest carbohydrates or everything properly, right? So, but you can't see them, right? And it's hard to know what until it's too late, like you said, Rip. I mean, they're getting worse and worse out there.
You can smell
them. Sometimes you can't, but usually, I mean, severe cases, you're going to smell them, right? It's going to be flat, musty, right? You're going to see more than usual dust levels. You know, sometimes you can smell them, but I wouldn't bank on the human sense of smell. By the time you can smell them, you got a really big problem.
Well, I was more thinking that the smelling the absence, because when you come home in the afternoon and feed, you haven't had supper yet yourself, and when you open up that bag, and it makes you even hungrier because it smells so good, then you don't have microtoxins. And if it smells like
Carrie, not everyone has that feeding experience because not everybody has freshly milled feed. Okay.
Hey, look, we're working on that.
Old.
We're working on that.
No.
Oh my goodness. Let's see. Laura Elwood had a comment here. She says she struggles with Shaggy when he's out of town during the week. She said, I'm doing better, but I still overfeed.
I mean, it happens.
It's okay, Laura. I overfeed too myself.
Yeah. Me three. Me three.
Yeah.
What about we've got a bird or birds that become selective picky eaters? What's your thoughts on that, Jeff? I've seen that in some of my birds.
Yeah. I'll see birds that are overweight. If they're significantly overweight, carrying too much fat, I've seen them be picky eaters. If there is a mycotoxin issue in one of the particular grains in a feed, they'll become more fussy eaters. This is part of the chicken psychology. I haven't figured out 100%. There's sometimes, I just see birds for whatever reason. I don't know if it's the moon phase or what, but they'll pick around. And some birds are just picky eaters, period. I mean, you can have a whole barn full of chickens and some eat faster than others, and some, it's just the nature of the beast. So I don't know if there's a perfect answer for picky eaters.
I will say, Jeff, that I haven't seen that much of a problem with picky eaters since I've switched over to the Triple M Farms feed. I don't know what difference that made, but I think it certainly made a difference.
I was going to
You're
say,
not overfeeding either, right?
No,
how much you feeding, Rip?
About 3 ounces per day per bird.
Okay. And even if they're mature, I don't know, are they laying yet?
Oh yeah.
Are you getting eggs? Okay. Well, that's fine for the hens, but once your roosters hit, maturity, you may have to even bring.
My males were badly overweight when I had them, when I was growing them out, and they were on all the feed they could eat. Man, gosh, they plumped up beyond belief.
Yeah, I've had some in grow outs, 5 months old, they hit standard weight for an adult bird. And I'm like, whoa.
Those reds can, oh man. I tickled Sue Dobson one time when I told her my little red feeder pigs were eating all they could handle. That's pretty much the way I look at them, because they'll stand right there and right around the feeder so they can eat anytime they want to.
Yeah.
Speaking of Sue, she says, I think the reds can smell the good stuff, the looks I get when they don't get it.
Oh man, I could imagine. They probably look down in the feeder and look at her like, what are you thinking, woman?
Yeah.
They can give you the stink eye. There ain't no doubt about that.
Oh yeah. But Rick, what you were talking about earlier, one of the things that I've noticed since I started feeding a coarse mash is, most everything looks the same.
Yep.
And when it's all mixed in, obviously sometimes you're going to get a big chunk of oat or something like that. And if they see that, they will nail it quick.
Oh yeah. Well, they like that larger.
It's like a foreign item or something. But
they like that larger particle size. It sticks out.
Yeah, but since I started feeding the coarse mash, they they just eat it. And then I guess since it all looks the same, they can't really pick and choose a whole lot.
Yeah, and Kerry, I've heard people say that their birds don't like mass and this, that, and the other, but my birds, that's all they've ever had. That's all they've ever known, and they'll eat it like it's going out of style.
I was going to say, if you spend a couple of weeks transitioning them, they'll go. Or if you raise them on a starter that's like that and never change it, they don't know.
Yeah, the only thing my Reds have ever had has been that Triple M Farms feed. Sounds like I'm doing a commercial for them, but I don't intend it to be that way.
How many birds you got now, Rick? What do you have down to?
There's probably about 15 or 16 out there.
Mature.
Let's say
you haven't hatched yet, right?
I hatched a few late last fall, but I haven't done any spring hatching yet. But I just got enough to keep me satisfied with having Reds here on the place.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it can be a handful.
I'm sorry, Jeff?
Even 15 can be a handful. So.
Oh, yeah. But I love them. That's what it's all about.
That's right.
Feed competition and fighting over feed. Kerry, what have you noticed about that with your birds?
So before I figured out that feeder space was a thing, I noticed that when I would feed, the biggest one would get there first and everybody else was going nuts. And, I didn't like that because sometimes they would peck each other, like, get out of the way, let me get a piece or whatever they were saying. And when I built, even in some of my smaller pens, I built some trough style feeders out of PVC. I had some 4-inch PVC laying around and I cut the top third off and glued some end caps on and screwed through to a piece of wood to weight it where it would stay straight and put eye bolts on the sides. And once I had 2 foot of space for like 3 or 4 birds, that went away. And when that went away, a lot of the other stuff, like it was like the birds were more calm and more peaceful. And I saw better egg production. The demeanor was better. Now, that could be a combination of a balanced diet versus not having to fight your neighbor for the next bit. All that could have been together because a lot of that happened around the same time. But that was a huge thing for me. And, that's why for my grow out, I wanted to build 2 of those 5 foot long feeders, which is way more than enough. But when I feed, I can actually start at one end and dump all the way to the other end. And they're behind me instead of me stepping on them. So I like that too. It's kind of handy because if you got a lot of birds in a grow out, they'll trip you up.
Oh, yes. Big time. We were talking earlier on that when you got those bullies in there that are trying to hog all the feed, that if you have multiple feeders, that can very often help with that. I even had some birds that were so bad, I had a multiple feeder set up with troughs, and I finally put a piece of plywood in front of it so the bully couldn't see the other ones back there eating.
That works. And, they say 2 to 3 inches of feeder space per bird. We both raise Reds and they can get kind of big. Me personally, I would kind of get more to like 4 to 5 inches just to have plenty of room to avoid the fighting and the competition.
I agree with you.
And, you know, again, like what you said with the multiple feeders, that was why I wanted to build at least 2 of those. So I could have one on one end and a couple of feet in the middle and one on the other end. But at the end of the day, you really need to observe their feeding behavior and see what's going on. Because if you do have one that's being a bully for no reason, he might need to go in a crock pot.
Oh, one thing that I forgot to mention when we were talking about those PVC pipe feeders, I finally figured out, that if I cut a little wooden plug that would fit inside that PVC pipe and screw it in place and just make a small compartment on each end, that I could use one for oyster shells and one for grit.
And Rip's light bulb came on. Yeah,
That's right.
good man.
Smacked myself
Back
upside
to-
the head and said, "Ooh, man."
Back to what Carrie said. So just general. Okay, so the 3 to 4 inches, Carrie, is for a 4-pound bird. So think of it this
Yeah.
way: you almost need 1 inch of feeder space for every pound of live weight. So almost like if you got a 6-pound red, you're looking at 5 to 6 inches of feeder space.
That's a good way to think about it. An inch per
That's
pound.
just an easy way to kind of put a number to it.
Yeah.
And that way they're not
hadn't-
crowded.
I hadn't thought about it, Jeff, but that's an excellent way
Mm-hmm.
to determine feeder space.
And that's all the way through their growing, right?
Oh, yeah.
Even like when they're chicks and all the way up. If we manage at that about 1 inch per pound of live weight, then you're not going to have that competition issue. You're not going to, everybody, there's plenty of room at the table for everybody.
Agreed. Hey, y'all going to appreciate this. You were making sport of my light bulb coming on when I figured out that little trip. Sue said, "Oh, that's a grand idea." Go for it, Sue. Hey, before we get too far along with what we're doing, I got a little video I want to play here so I won't forget. So bear with me just a few seconds, sorry. We would like to take a short break to express our appreciation to the Poultry Company for their sponsorship of the Poultry Keepers 360 Live programming. Poultry has been a trusted name in sustainable farming and poultry nutrition for decades, and their commitment to providing high-quality, natural products align perfectly with the values we hold dear in our poultry community. Thank you, Poultry, for partnering with us to empower poultry keepers everywhere. We're truly grateful for your dedication and support. Amen to that. Gosh.
You know, speaking of them, I got a call from a number today that was out of Kentucky.
Mhm.
And the lady asked me who I was. You know, she was confirming, and she said, "I'm looking for some poultry NutriBalancer." I said, "Yes, ma'am. I have some of that in the warehouse." "Oh, good. I need a 60-pound bag." I said, "Ma'am, I am very sorry." She was driving through, and she said that when she needs it, she always looks at dealers that are on her way through wherever she's going on a trip, so she can pick it up, because, you know, shipping a 60-pound bag is kind of atrocious. And she was like, I told her, I said, "Unfortunately, it's rationed right now, and the only thing that's available are the 12.5-pound bags." And she goes, "I've had several people tell me that they only had the small bags." I said, "Yes, ma'am. Unfortunately, the few people the ones that can actually get it, that's the only way they're able to get it." So I told her to take what she had and send an email to livestock@fortrail.com and ask for alternate methods of achieving what she wanted. So
Makes sense.
Yeah,
Jeff,
those people are smart.
Here's a question for you. Might
I'm
be on your
speaking
list
that.
already, but she's interested in, I guess she's talking about the timing of feeding.
When to
I free,
feed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
she's free ranging, and there's certain, she's wanting to know what's the best time of day to feed her birds. What's your thoughts, Jeff?
Um, Look, this is purely from me spending time observing my birds. But the most important feeding time for a chicken is 1 hour before sunset. Okay. And so late afternoon, but not too close to dark. I want them to go to bed with a full crop, but I also want them to have a chance to. Well, they're going to be full of crap too by midnight. But anyway, I want them to fill up their crop, but I also want to give them time to drink, right, and soften that so they can digest it. And then, so 1 hour before sunset is the primary feeding time for poultry. All right, you can laugh at me. It's okay. I can take it.
I wasn't laughing at you. I was laughing with Carrie. So,
Okay.
um, Carrie, here's one that I know lights your fire.
Oh Lord.
Feed getting contaminated with droppings. Tell us how you really feel, Carrie.
uh, about the same way as the bird does. Um, you know, if it depends on what kind of droppings it is as to how I would approach it. Number one, if the droppings are really small, then not only are you feeding your chickens, but you're also feeding the local mice. And again, you're feeding too much, or your feeder's not high enough, something along those lines. If your birds are doing it, they're being rude, and they don't have any table manners, and your feeder's not high enough, and you don't have enough. You don't, in my opinion, you don't have adequate roost, because that would be the only reason they would try to get on top of that feeder, is because they want to roost. And, you know, having more adequate roost space, that, you know, we talked about an inch per pound for feeder space. I'm going to say a foot per 5 pounds of roosting space, give or take, is what they should have. And if they have a roost that is high and not over the feeder, they will get on that before they get on top of the feeder. That's my opinion. But you should always clean your feeders regularly by washing them and disinfecting them with something to make sure you don't have any kind of buildup.
Yes, big time. Jeff, here's one for you. She says, I have chicks. They were not interested in the milk on day 3. When I give them the milk tomorrow, should I remove their water to encourage them to drink the milk?
Nope. Never ever take the water away. But okay, and I have seen some chicks. It takes them longer to find the milk. Okay. Once they figure it out, they'll devour it. Now, and when every time we've talked about feeding milk to chicks, I always say to use like the aluminum pie plates, pie tins that you get at the store.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a reason for that. Okay. It's they're shiny and they draw attention. Okay. So if you use some other opaque or generic container, you may or may not have the same success level. So the shininess is what gets you started. it attracts them. They come over, they peck at it. They're curious, usually. Okay, not always, but and you may have to dip a beak or two just so they know what it is. Okay, and once you get one or two of them started, they usually make that funny sound that the rest of them come running, right? So,
Yep.
I don't know what that sound is, but they can communicate at a higher level than I can comprehend, because when one of them finds something, special and unusual, they all come running. So,
I was talking with someone, I don't know, a couple of months ago, and they said they were having that issue, but they solved it by putting some cat's eye marbles in the milk,
yeah.
which I guess would be the same thing as attracting the
Ooh.
attracting factor.
That would definitely build up curiosity.
Just something to get them going. But it has to be something that attracts them. So yeah, like the cat's eye marble,
Yep.
anything like that. Once they know what it is, and you put it back in there again, and they smell it and see it, it won't be a problem. It's on the first go around, they don't really know what it is.
Joey said, "Okay, I've got some pie plates and I have some glass marbles.
Okay.
Joey, you're good to go, kid." Um, ooh, wrong paper.
Ruh-roh.
Yeah. What about inconsistent feed supply? That's like when the birds run out of feed too soon. Um,
I'm gonna shut my mouth. I'm gonna.
I was gonna say,
I don't say.
that goes back to a couple of the other problems that we've talked
Yeah.
about, is the inadequate feeder space and the bully that has a problem. But I'm sure what Jeff was going to allude to is, if you watch your birds, flip your bucket upside down, sit down and observe what they're doing, and track the consumption to determine how much they're consuming daily, and buy accordingly so you don't run out. Don't let it be your fault, because as chicken tenders, running out of feed, mine don't get in the truck and go to the feed store. So, and that's been a thing that snuck up on me before, not thinking about a holiday coming up Friday, and one of those where they're closed Friday, Saturday, and I don't have any feed, and now I'm stuck going and buying some crap. And like what Sue said earlier, they're looking at you like, what are you trying to feed me? So I would always say that you should observe your birds, know what they're eating, or calculate how many you have, and think about that 3 to 4 ounces a day. Plan ahead for seasonal changes, because birds will eat more in the winter than they do in the summer, which will require an adjustment. But if you calculate it out and you think you need 3 bags, buy 4. It's not going to hurt. You're going to use it anyway. That's just my opinion. And opinions are like what Jeff wanted his bird to be full of a while ago.
shame on you, Carrie.
There's nothing more saddening to me when I get the message or email or the call. I ran out of feed, so I ran down to, you finally get somebody to switch over to a really good, high quality feed, right? Their light bulb comes on, and they're like, "Oh, I ran out. I had to run down to the store and buy a bag of Tractor Supply, crap, and my birds won't eat it." I mean, part of me hates that call, and part of me kind of chuckles really.
I was gonna say, you want to laugh.
Yeah.
Like deep inside.
Yeah. It's hard not to laugh at people when that happens. But, look, I'm a calendar user, right? I have everything on my calendar. Like, if I had to use my memory for about anything,
Oh,
it ain't going to happen. So it's,
I agree with that.
you know what
Gosh.
you know what you use every month, and you know how long it takes to get it. So set a calendar reminder, check your feed, and order feed. Right? That's, I don't know. It ain't rocket science.
I mean, I've got an alarm set because I've got to take my mom something tomorrow, and I've got an alarm set to remind me to take it for in the morning before I leave.
But what I was sitting here chuckling about is you said, people, you know how many birds you have. And truth be told, look, I just asked Rip how many birds he had. So the people watching this show do never have a total bird count because they don't want to face the reality that they have more than they should. All right. So, yep, as Rip raised his hand. So look, I mean, it's okay.
That's why I said get an extra bag, because you're going to use it anyway. To account for really having a few too many birds.
And that way,
I've quit asking this question now after working with poultry keepers for the last 10 or more years. Okay, the breeder / hobbyist / backyarder. How many birds do you have? I don't know. They don't even want to admit it. It's like admitting you're an alcoholic or something, right? It's just no, not me. It's like, come on, man.
I don't have too many.
You don't have too many?
Garrett says, I have the bigger galvanized feeders, and now I have rats. Trapped 18 to 20 so far. He said it's hard to believe because he never had a problem before. Well, if you're leaving those feeders, if you're full feeding and those feeders you have feed in them overnight, that's just an open cafeteria for them.
Yeah. And they get worse in the fall and winter, right?
Yes.
When food is harder to find, they get worse in the fall and winter. So, but if there ain't nothing there to eat, then they won't be there to hang out. And if they get in under your foundation of your building and stuff, you never get rid of them.
I have found on Amazon these yellow wafers, and rats love them. But you got to make sure that your chickens don't. You got to make sure you're feeding good feed, and your chickens don't try to eat the dead rats, because it will help with the problem. Those wafers work really well when you have a lot of rats, but like you said earlier, Jeff, if you have a lot of chickens, it's only a matter of time.
Well, Kerry, you probably be familiar with this term, being from the South. But we have a saying down here in the South: when you get too many rats, it's time to get all the community together to have a good old-fashioned rat killing.
Mm-hmm.
You give everybody a stick and run them out.
Yeah, well, up here, our old saying that I've learned from my grandfathers and before is, for every one rat you actually see, there's 100 more.
No, I can believe that.
Yeah, that's probably true too.
Trying to get them all, even for a good old-fashioned rat killing, I don't know how you're going to do it unless you're going to start filling the holes full of fluid or something to run them out of there. But
that's what we had to do. We'd fill it up with water. But they're a problem to deal with, no doubt about it. Laura had a comment here that she's talking about running out of feed, and she says, "Or your feed mill decides they are no longer doing custom feed mixes and give you no notice."
Yeah, that's a big one.
That would irk me beyond belief, to be honest with you.
But I mean,
Laura and Shaggy are going to be making their own feed here soon.
More and more are doing it.
Well, yeah. I wish more and more people would take that control. But
I will caution the people that are considering making their own feed. It will start you down a rabbit hole, and once you start looking at what your birds eat, you will further look at what you eat, and it's a cycle. And it's changed me quite a bit. 25 pounds worth for one. So it's a good thing.
I thought you were going down a different road there, because when you start making your own chicken feed, as soon as anybody finds out, you're going to be in the chicken feed business, right?
I mean,
Because people will find you.
That is definitely true.
You can't keep that a secret. You just can't,
Mm-mm.
Laura says, "Yep, just ordered all the machinery. Good for you, Laura.
Yep.
Good for you." Let's see. There's another one. Oh, when we're also talking about running out of feed, Garrett says Petco delivers free with a $35 order. Combat feed is available. Okay, getting back to my handy dandy little list here. Um, and this is something I had because I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. I should have known better. But it's a clogged or blocked feeder. And sometimes that's a result of not checking your feeders every day. It's also related sometimes to the form of feed you're using.
Mm-hmm.
The tube feeders, um, they are not very user friendly if you're feeding mash. It just seems to get stopped up in there and doesn't fall down like it should. Just
Not in the
another reason.
South, especially.
Yeah, with our humidity and all that. So that's just another boat for trough type feeders, y'all. Um, those tube feeders work best with crumbles or pellets because
Mm-hmm.
it just flows better in those things. And we were talking about troughs, but I can remember back in the day, a trough feeder was about all you could get because you built most of them.
Yeah.
Jeff, this is going to be a dumb question, but I'm just asking because I know somebody's probably thinking about it. Is there anything that could be added to mash feed to where it would work in a tube type feeder, make it flow better?
Grit.
Yeah, grit will help. I mean, you can put what they call anti-caking agents in there, or flow agents. Diatomaceous earth and a handful of other things, but it's just taking away space, for nutrition.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a really coarse mash that has like whole grains, cracked corn will flow fine. It'll flow well. But if it's not really chunky, granola looking type feed, it's not going to. And like you said, all around tube feeders were designed for, that they came about at around the same time as pellets and crumbles did. Or if you find those really old ones, Rip, remember when you were a boy, there were some around in the big commercial chicken houses. But back then they were feeding big chunky, feed.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, I was at a meeting this afternoon, before jumping on the show, and we passed around some feed. One of the guys brought some feed to show, he wanted me to look at it and give me his opinion. And it was, nice, big, granola looking, chunky feed. And that would flow fine in a tube feeder. But, too many mashes out there are turned into powder, just ground right down to nothing. And those will never flow, right? So you've got to have a linear, horizontal type feeder to present those to your bird. But
Back when we had our commercial leghorn flock, when I was a kid, all I remember mash feed being was that fine powdery format. And for a little while, that's the only form of feed you can get. That was before they came up with the pellets and the crumble form. But we didn't see any of the good chunky mash type feeds.
Yeah.
all the feed mills use a thing called a hammer mill, and hammer mills are flying at 37,000 RPMs. And, the more feed they can put through, the more money the feed mill can make. Well, those things just turn it right down into powder. And it's just the nature of the beast.
Now, Rip, I will say this: feeding a mash before I got more trough style feeders, and I kept some of my bigger feeders for when I go out of town because people don't feed the way I do. And if I've got grow outs or something like that going, I'll want to set them up for a while. And what I found is drilling small holes in the bottoms. So, like if you have that horizontal rain and it gets in there, if you drill holes in the bottom, it helps. And what I'll do is I'll put oyster shell and grit in the bottom of the feeder, just a thin layer, and I'll have holes drilled in there. And I'll also drill some small ones in the sides to allow airflow. And I've had pretty good luck with that because, yes, a mash, even though it's inside somewhere where it's not going to ever get rain, in the South it gets humidity, and it'll clog one up pretty fast. But drilling the holes I found has made a pretty big difference when I have to use those.
It's good to know. Good to know. Joy has a question here. She's wanting to have suggestions for chick feeders, so they don't scratch so much out of the feed.
Keep raising them up.
Yeah, and I have found the best success by using a piece of PVC pipe and just cutting off 1/3 of it. That forms that little lip that forces the feed to fall back down into the feed trough, and getting it at the right height. They still get some of it out. I'm not going to lie and say they don't, but it has greatly reduced that problem for me. Just something to think about, Joey.
I use the long trough style ones in some of my brooders that have the little holes that they have to stick their head into. If you don't have time or saws or stuff to make out of PVC for chicks, I found that those will work pretty good. You'll want to make sure you got about twice as many holes as you do chicks, but those, and also I keep some 1x6s to use, and I'll first set it on the brooder floor, the peat moss, and because they're really little, and as they get a little bigger, I'll actually put a 1x there, and when I notice them getting crazy with the feed, I'll raise it up and put another one so they're barely able to get to it. And it's kind of like using a string to raise your feeder out in the pens, but I'll use a 1x to do that. Just raise it up a piece of wood.
I have seen some people that, they contact me and say, I've got one of those regular plastic chick feeders and it's got the holes in it, but they still waste a lot of feed. Well, come to find out, they're filling that thing completely full of all the feed they can get in there. Well, when you do that, they're going to waste feed.
Oh, yeah. I mean, chicks are like teenagers. Where there's a will, there's a way. They'll figure it out. Whether it's making a mess, wasting feed, they'll figure it out.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Jeff, you started to say something.
Well, I don't want to pick on Joy, but she sent me pictures of her brooder, and I'm sitting here looking on my phone at the feeder, and I'm looking at the chicks, and the feeder height is not high enough. Okay. So just gotta be careful what you send me, folks.
Joy says, thank you. Gotcha. You understand?
Yeah. So, find some 1x's to raise them up, or, something. That'll work.
For the Bird says, they do waste a lot of food. They sure will.
The first week, okay, the first 7 days, I don't necessarily worry about, right? Because a good brooder pretty much has like a coarse-faced cardboard or something on the floor for traction. And I don't necessarily worry. The first 7 days, I want to get as much feed into them as I can.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Right now,
Yeah.
you can start, then you start taking away access to feed, or you clean out the brooder, get rid of the spilled feed, right? And, start making them eat it out of the feeder that's at the right height.
Joy has a comment here. She said, okay,
Yeah.
Jeff, the picture I sent was still on day 6, and I wanted them to get the feed into them.
Okay. So now, now it's day 7. So, let's clean up all the spilled feed. Let's get the bedding going.
She says,
Yeah.
you just said it.
Yeah.
Tomorrow is cleanup day or clean out
Yep.
day.
Yeah.
And get those feeders at the right height. So we'll quit wasting feed. We'll be fine. But the first week, I don't really worry about it a whole lot. Right. So
I was gonna
not
say
as
the
big
first.
a risk of things like coccidiosis and all that. They've just absorbed their yolk sac. They shouldn't have been contaminated with anything yet. So, and Joy runs her brooder kind of like a ICU unit. It's spick and span, spotless. Like, you could eat off the floor in her brooder. That's how clean it is. So just
Good for her.
Hey,
right.
that
She's doing a
hey,
great job.
she definitely gets a good job for that because
Yep.
not many people do.
Here's another question. Angie Simmons said, I'm going to be trying cull feeders this year in my mobile coops. Do you have any tips for me on what to watch for? They make several different types of feeders.
Well, most of the cools are the 35 or 40 pound hanging ring feeder. Don't buy them. Just don't do it. Don't do it. And if you did it already, I'm sorry, but I hate those things. I absolutely they don't flow right. People buy them because they're cost effective. There's a reason why they're cost effective, right? I'm just not a fan of the round, cool, 35, 40 pound feeder. Okay.
I'm curious to know what that mobile coop is made out of. And the reason I say that is because I have seen quite a bit where people they'll go to whatever their big box home improvement store is and get the widest gutter they can find and mount that to the side, the outer side wall, and have a ton of feeder space. And just, you could take that and dump it straight out of the bucket into that and make your own troughs. And you could even get fancy with it and make it where they're adjustable so you can raise them up as the birds grow. It'd be a lot cheaper than those coals.
Yeah. Joy says,
I've seen a lot of people. Yeah, Joy is an RN.
Yeah.
But the PVC rain gutter makes excellent feeders, right? So if you're in a hurry and you don't have a better plan, right, then
that's what Jessica Watson uses.
Okay. Yeah. But you do need a way to change the height of them as the bird gets taller. If you're going to use it all the way from chick through grow out. So since this is a show about feeders and feeding, Rip, I'm going to say this, and I've never said this on the show before. Okay.
Uh-oh.
So, ooh, just for us tonight, exclusive.
The feeders and waterers that you plan to use throughout the bird's life. So, and I'm not going to pick whether it's nipples or bells or fountain or whatever, feeders, drinkers, whatever. Okay. Do not make drastic changes. So those chicks need to be exposed to the feeder type that they're going to live their life on. Because every time you move them from, say, brooder to grow out to, puberty to adult, right? People like to change their feeders because they've got 15 different kinds of feeders.
Yeah.
That is not good for your chickens. Okay. Don't don't assume that they have enough intelligence to figure out where their feed is. And so if you're going to use a red feeder in the brooder, then you use a red feeder all the way through life.
Yep.
Okay. You need to maintain consistency in your appearance for the delivery of feed and water. Okay.
Carrie, Angie said,
on the birds.
You'll like this, Carrie. She said her coop is an Illuma coop, 10 by 12.
All right. So with that in mind, there's a high chance that she was going to get those coal feeders from the same person she got that Illuma coop from, because they sell those as well. Instead of doing that, that company also makes a gutter type feeding system out of aluminum that will hang onto the wire, and you can adjust it up and down as the birds get taller. They originally made that for their 12 by 12 and their 12 by 24 tractors that are specifically designed for meat birds, to where you could feed them from outside. But I have personal experience that those troughs work in a 10 by 12. They'll work in the 6 by 10, but they're too long for the 5 by 6. But those gutters, they're aluminum, already made, and they're designed to hang on the wire so you can easily adjust them.
Yes, indeed. Makes life easy. Let's see. Gun Cleaning Palin says they use towels cut to fit in the brooder and change it every 3 days. They have a big feeder in there and one, and four pile, yeah.
Yep.
That's good.
Yeah, first few days I use puppy pads and line my brooder with them, and I'll pile feed on those. And after that, I use stall pellets.
Anything you can do to get them eaten in a hurry, I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see. Got two more here before we're done. Overfeeding and feed spoilage. Carrie, give us some words of wisdom on that.
Try your best to avoid both. Storing feed, I look at that as the way I store my food for my family, because sometimes my chickens don't make the lucky cut and wind up that way. Keep it out of the elements, preferably somewhere that's not really humid, definitely away from mice, rats, rodents of any kind. Do that. You will only, if possible, only provide the daily portion instead of feeding them all the time, unless it's a chick or a bird in the grow out stage until they get to that monitor weight. You do need to monitor their feed consumption and adjust the proportions. Again, that goes to paying attention and watching your birds. And use feeders that dispense gradually, like a gravity fed or a trough type, to reduce the excess. Again, we're chicken tenders. We're not perfect, but put forth the effort and your birds will thank you.
Yes, indeed. Okay, I got one here that's going to get, I saved it for last because I know Jeff would have gotten fired up if I'd put that out first. But Jeff, nutritional deficiencies due to poor feed choices.
That's pretty much every commercial brand out there. Come on, Rip.
He didn't even narrow it down for you, Jeff. You just pick it. Tell us about it. Just pick one.
Oh, man. Everybody just looks at protein. Everybody's drunk on protein. And it's like, skip over the protein. Start looking at the fat and the fiber and the amino acids, right? And, get down into the nitty gritty. Or just don't even look at the guaranteed analysis. Look at the ingredients first. if it doesn't tell you what's in the feed, then, get something else. But, there's a lot of people showing chickens or doing special purposes with their chickens on this group, right? And in the group on Facebook. And, we can't feed everyday common garbage that comes from the big box store and expect to have the best chickens in the world. Okay. It ain't going to happen. So I don't know. Instead of keeping, 3 times as many chickens as we should, I think it'd be way better to, cut back and invest in some really good feed. Everybody says, oh, I can't afford it. This is the Kerry story, right? When I first started with Kerry about 3 years ago, it's like, just break down and get some real feed, would you? Oh man, it's expensive. It ain't, it ain't going to make that big a difference. Come on, right? It's not, feed's feed. Well, no shit. Feed is not feed. And when you can feed 30% less and your birds grow faster and look better, okay? I mean, do the math, okay? And every commercial feed out there on the market is vying for your, they all want your dollar, right? Yep. So they're competing on, and they know you're looking at price only. And so they keep making the feed cheaper so they can be in the right price range on the shelf. And so we're working ourselves right into the,
One thing I have started telling people when I explain that to them, they say, oh, I can't afford it. That's too much. And I just say, hey, you can't afford not to do it because it's going to save you money.
And I mean, it really does.
It does.
Because, and I know this sounds really stupid, because to me 3 years ago, it sounded really stupid. But when you feed the better feed and you do feed the grit, they consume a whole lot less, because chickens are naturally gluttonous, but when their nutrition side is taken care of, they will eat less naturally, even if they have feed left in the cup or the trough. And I have found that by using feed that is in that $25 to $28 to $30 range, when they're only consuming 2.5, 2 3/4 ounces of feed a day, instead of that $15 a bag feed or that $17 a bag feed, and they're eating 4 to 5 ounces a day, that's where your difference is. And I thought it was crazy, but I started monitoring everything and did me a good old Excel spreadsheet, and it is cheaper.
Certainly is.
Well, and your end result is 20 or 30% better. I mean, your bird on the other end is, so, if you're only measuring it from the economics of feed, yeah, you're probably going to even out. Yeah, you spent $30 on a bag of feed, right? And your feed cost may remain the same, but yeah, you're not even calculating how much better your bird's going to reproduce, how many more eggs you're going to get, how much stronger your chicks are going to be. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that nobody's taken into account until they try it. Okay.
I mean, if I take an egg out of one of my nest box and throw it across the field, it'll bounce at least twice. And because I had been out of town and I noticed that my chicken tender had forgot to clean out one particular nest box. And I was just launching the eggs, and my wife was like, they're bouncing. I said, yeah. And she just looked at me. I said, why do you think you have to use a butter knife to crack eggs? She said, I don't know. It's the feed. It's got enough calcium in it. But like you said earlier, Jeff, a lot of people You know, I have people that'll send me pictures of birds that look horrible and want to know the problem. They're like, I'm feeding an 18% feed. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Well, send me a picture of the feed tag. And, you know, I see it. You know, it's everybody that regularly tunes into the show knows what methionine does. And it was like 0.19 on the guaranteed analysis, which was crazy low. So,
yep, none added. Not even close to balanced. So,
Well, I think that winds us up for this show. I appreciate all our listeners and all those great questions and comments. And Jeff and Carrie, I appreciate you being here to help us through this night. Y'all did a great job. I hope everybody enjoyed it. You have any final words of wisdom, Jeff or Carrie?
no, it was a good show.
It was.
Glad I made it.
I enjoyed talking about this.
Me too. Well, guys and gals and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Keep enjoying your birds, and we will see you in just about 2 weeks.